Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Maura Prendeville. I'm a compliance officer at the Office of Labor Standards Enforcement, and I'm joined here by my colleague Gabrielle Moses, who will be presenting with us as well. One caveat here is that this is not a general compliance webinar. If you are new to the HCSO, this is not the place for you. This is going to be very technical. This presentation is aimed at large employers, brokers, representatives of large employers who already have a good understanding of the HCSO and are just looking for a refresher on how to match up their 2024 costs of their self-funded plans to figure out if it matches up with the HCSO requirements. If you're looking for a general compliance webinar, we offer those every month, and you can look at our website for more information about that. The other caveat is that we're not going to be talking about 2025 compliance. We're only discussing 2024 self-funded plans and matching them up with the 2024 rates. So we're going to first give you a little background on the HCSO and some of the rules about self-funded plans. And how to calculate the expenditures. And then Gabrielle will be talking about how to calculate and make top-off payments in this upcoming month, and we'll cover some best practices. And let me cover a few housekeeping items now. This webinar is recorded, and we will post all the materials on our website, likely by the end of today or early tomorrow. We're going to have two parts to the webinar. The first one is about how to calculate the value of the plan, and we will have a Q&A session after that section, and then we will have a second Q&A section after the top-off presentation. You are able to ask questions throughout, so if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a Q&A section. If you do not see that, there are 3 dots on the lower right of your screen. And if you click on those, WebEx should allow you to pop up the Q&A section. If we do not answer your questions during the webinar, we will follow up within 2 business days over email to make sure you get your questions answered. And now I'm going to hand this off to Gabrielle for an overview of our office. Here we go.
All right, thank you so much, Maura. Good morning, everyone. I am Gabrielle Moses, as Maura said. I am glad to be here with you this morning. Both Maura and I work for the Office of Labor Standard Enforcement, and the Office of Labor Standard Enforcement, also known as OLSE. Our office enforces an array of San Francisco labor laws, including citywide laws and laws specifically for city contractors, lessees, and grantees. The OLSE has investigative authority and enforcement power, and we offer technical assistance for employers. Some of the laws that we have that we enforce and we offer technical assistance on are shown here. As you can see, the Healthcare Security Ordinance, Military Leave Pay Protection Act, Paid Parental Leave Ordinance, consideration of salary history. And these are, I'm just reading off some of the ordinance, but you can see the others here. So for all of these, we offer technical assistance. We have hotlines for both phone calls as well as emails on each of these laws. And it's always best, if an employer thinks that they're out of compliance with any of these laws, is to contact our hotline or to email us. You're not penalized for reaching out to us. If you realize that you've been out of compliance with these laws, we can talk you through how to address it. I will say that also too that San Francisco passes new labor laws every year, so make sure that you stay on top of any laws that may apply to your business. Okay, so the Healthcare Security Ordinance, it requires covered employers to make healthcare expenditures for covered employees at a specific rate. So essentially what that means is that the HCSO is a spending requirement. Really the easiest way to think about this law is that it is a spending requirement. It's not about insurance. It's not an insurance requirement. Although I will say that insurance is the most common way employers comply with the spending requirements. Um, let's just talk about the spending requirements a little bit. In 2024, for a medium-sized employer, meaning a business that has between 20 and 99 employees worldwide, the rate of spending under the HCSO was $2.34. But given that this audience is probably large employers, employers with 100 or more employees, because you're using self-funded plans, and typically self-funded plans are used by larger employers. The examples that I'm going to present in this presentation will apply to large employer calculations. So they will be for employers with 100 or more employees. So thinking about that, in 2024, the rate for large employees was $3.51. So if you had an employee that worked there the full calendar year, um, each month you should have spent $603.72, or by the end of the year, $7,244.64. The healthcare spending rules for self-funded plans in 2017, it did change, but it only changed in the way that OLSE looks at the spending. So instead of looking at the calculations quarterly, um, self-funded employers can look at these calculations once a year at an annual basis. And you can, when we hand out these slides, you'll be able to click on this link and be able to read the full text of the HCSO rules. Okay, so as I stated, the rules did change as far as the look back period, but all of the other provisions of HCSO still apply. So as an employer, you are still should meet your quarterly spending deadlines for your employees that are enrolled in your fully funded health plans. Also, if you have employees that are not enrolled in your company's insurance, you'll need to make quarterly spending deadlines. And if they're not eligible for your insurance, these employees also are entitled to HCSO spending, and it must be done on a quarterly basis. So the self-funded is only applicable for an annual look back, but all the other employees who are under other plans should, or not on any plans, should receive quarterly healthcare expenditures. Okay, well, let's just discuss some basic rules for self-funded plans. HCSO, it requires employers to look at the money they actually spent. So starting in 2018, employers could no longer use COBRA rates to calculate required healthcare expenditures, because the COBRA rates are just an estimate of the plan's value rather than a reflection of the actual cost. Another rule for self-funded type of plans in which employer pays claims as they occur on a rolling basis, then the calculations of the healthcare expenditures can be done annually. And I mentioned this before, but compared to your fully funded plans where the calculation is done quarterly. So if you are an employer, using a self-funded plan, um, and you're calculating on an annual basis, if you do have a shortfall, you would need to make those additional top-off payments by February, the last day of February of the following year. And so that's the period of time that we're looking at now. You're seeing now what you have spent, and to determine if you need to make any additional expenditure by the end of February 2025. And I'm going to transfer it over to Mara, and she's going to give you an overview of the calculation instructions.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Give me a moment here. Oh, thank you. All right, so as Gabrielle was saying, um, we're looking back at 2024 expenditures. Uh, there are different types of self-funded health plans, but the ones that we get the most questions about fit into the definition in the OLSC's rules 5.9b, where employers pay claims as they're incurred rather than paying like a set fee um, on a regular basis. They're looking at incurring claims and then paying them out as they're incurred. In this situation, this is the one instance where employers can look at the annual rather than quarterly spend. So Gabrielle has said this already, but we're going to keep reiterating this. For employees who are enrolled in traditional fully funded health plans or who are not enrolled in any of the company's health plans, the regular quarterly deadlines still apply. So those employees are still entitled to quarterly expenditures. The ones who are enrolled in these types of self-funded plans are not, because the employer has the chance to look at the total annual cost of the plan. So how do you figure out what that cost is? The HCSO allows employers to average the cost of a health plan. And this applies to self-funded plans as well as regular fully funded health plans. This is a very common practice for larger employers, and you see it in a lot of different situations. So you may have employees who are younger, who don't cost very much, and then you can average them with older employees who may cost more, whose premiums are higher. Um, you may also have a wide range of costs. You may have some employees that don't incur any claims throughout the whole year, and then you may have another employee who has premature triplets, and you spend a ton of money on that employee and very little money on the other. You can average them together to see what the total average cost is. And this can only be done within one plan. So let's look at what that means. So most large employers will offer a variety of different health plans, and you can only average the expenditures together within one plan. So on this menu listed here, there are 4 different options. So the employer has got a fully funded Kaiser plan. They can look at the average cost of every employee that's enrolled in that plan. Then they've got a high deductible health plan. Again, they can look at the cost within that plan. And then they've got 2 other options here where the employer is allowed to look at the average cost of each plan. So it's important that you're looking at each plan separately. The company cannot say, oh, in all, our total company-wide healthcare spending was X dollars. You can't do that. You have to do each separate plan. And you can't average, say the executive employees are getting a platinum level, very expensive health plan, and then the lower paid employees are only offered a high deductible plan. You're not averaging those two together. You're looking at the average cost of each plan separately. And it's pretty common for an employer to have a variety of different health plans, some of which comply with the HCSO spending requirement and some of which do not. So how do you figure out what the cost is? It's kind of the basic formula is you take the cost, you back out the employee's share of cost, and then that gives you the total spend. So again, if you have employees contributing to their premiums, that's completely fine, but you don't count that as an employer expenditure. It's not the employer spending that money, it's the employee, so you don't get credit for that. We have found sometimes with self-funded plans, we've seen a few situations where once the employer backs out the employee premiums, the employer was spending little or nothing because the employees were actually bearing the bulk of the cost. So that would definitely not comply with the HCSO, but that's why it's important to make sure you back out that section. Okay, so what are the costs? So you're going to look at claims that were paid in 2024, not just claims incurred. So if you had an employee who ended up in the emergency room on New Year's Eve, they've incurred that claim in 2024, but likely that has not been paid yet. So that does not get counted. It can get counted for 2025 because it'll be paid in 2025, but it was not paid in 2024, so you don't count that. You're looking at claims paid in 2024. If you have employees who have dependents enrolled in the plan, those claims can be included, assuming they're paid by the employer, not the employee. And again, you want to back out any employee cost share. What is a claim? The typical IRS tax deductible medical expense definition, any amounts that you're paying directly to medical providers. So any payments that the company has made to doctors' offices, hospitals, pharmacies on behalf of the employees in their plan, those are going to be claims. The HCSO does allow some fees to be included in the cost of the health plan, like stop loss insurance. Fees that cannot be included are generally ones that are already required by other laws. So if you're required by the ACA to send out a 1098C notice to your employees, you don't get to count that as a cost of complying with the HCSO. If the employer has paid a broker some sort of consulting fee for designing the plan, that is not a healthcare expenditure, so you don't want to include those. It can be pretty nuanced, so if you have some sort of fee that you're wondering whether or not you can include that in your calculations, please contact us, and we might even ask for a description of the product or the fee that you're paying so that we can assess whether or not it would fit the definition of a healthcare expenditure. HSAs, those are pretty commonly used as an additional, they can be counted as claims when you're looking at the value of a self-funded health plan, as long as they are employer paid. So if you have an employer who has a health plan and then they put in a set amount per year or a set amount per month, those can count as healthcare expenditures when you're looking at the value of the plan. If employees are contributing their own money towards an HSA, that is not an employer expenditure. But any employer contributions to the HSAs can count in the claims bucket. Some plans offer additional benefits. So for example, we've started to see this a little more frequently where a health plan might have a fertility services for up to a certain dollar amount. So to the extent that the employer has actually spent that money, that can count towards the total claims and the total cost of the plan. But you would not count any money that has been allocated to a benefit but not spent. So in this example, there may be something that's offered and available to employees, but only a few employees actually take advantage of it and use it. The money that was actually spent on those employees can be counted, but the amount that was allocated and not spent does not count towards the claims amount. And refunds, we are going to talk about refunds in more detail later on, but often, a lot of employers are moving towards self-funded plans because they can be cheaper in some situations, and that kind of goes contrary to the purpose of the HCSO, which is a spending requirement. So if an employer gets a refund back from their carrier because their employees didn't have as many claims as they were expecting, that money is not an expenditure because you're getting it back. So remember that the HCSO requires that all money spent be irrevocable, meaning it cannot revert back to the employer. So if you do have money that reverts back to you, you're going to have to account for that and back it out of the claims. And, it kind of ceases to become a cost to the employer because it was returned. And we'll talk about how that looks in the calculations later on. Okay, and so the time frame, this has caused confusion in the past, but you're looking at the prior year's expenditures as well as the prior year's rates. So even though we're in 2025, you're looking back at 2024 costs and the 2024 rates. So your goal is to figure out whether or not you met the $3.51 per hour that was required last year. For 2025 future compliance, you're looking at the 2025 rate. All right, so now we've talked about how to assess the cost. Once you have the cost of the plan, then you're going to divide it by the payable hours for the employees in that plan. So we'll be going into more detail about that later on, but you're looking at each plan separately, the total cost divided by the hours for the people enrolled in that plan. And then that gives you an hourly expenditure rate for that plan. So, and there are different ways that employers can do this. There's the HCSO allows for 3 different options. A lot of employers will run the numbers in different ways and just kind of select the one that's most favorable to the employer. That is acceptable as long as you have verification of your calculations. So the most common one is for employers, large nationwide employers, to look at their nationwide average of the cost. That's probably the most frequently used. And so that's when you're looking at the cost nationwide, not just the San Francisco employees and their costs. Some employers will use option B because they are able to they're somehow able to match up the claims by geographic region and isolate the San Francisco group, or employers that are exclusively in San Francisco may use this option, or if employers have the ability to do this one, they can do it this way. And then C, employers will only use this one if they can't do one of the other two. So if for some reason they can't match up employee hours with the employee costs, then they can go, we have a workaround for that, but it's usually much harder for the employer to get to the dollar amount that they need to. And we're going to show you some sample calculations in a moment, but you're going to see the number 2064 quite a bit for annual hours rather than 2080. That's just because the HCSO has a maximum spend of 172 hours per month. So if you use 2080 for other calculations, other payroll issues, you're going to not want to do that. You're going to want to use 2064. That also makes it easier for the employer to get to the spending rate. All right, so this is, oops, I skipped. Yes, option A. So this is the most common approach that employers take. We have an example here of Acme Corporation has 350 employees that are enrolled in this plan. Some are full-time, so we use the 2064 hours, and 50 of them are part-time. So we're going to just assume part-time is half of that, so 20 hours a week. We've got here the total costs. So the employer's gone through and figured out how much it spent, $2.1 million. Then it adds up the hours for everybody that was enrolled in the plan, divides it, and they assess the value of their plan at $313 per hour, which falls short of the 2024 rate. And so they'll have to make a top-off payment. The other option is option B, when you're looking just at the costs of the covered employees. So the covered employees means the employees that are covered by the HCSO, meaning the San Francisco employees. Nearly all your San Francisco employees are going to be covered by the HCSO. There are a few exceptions that are listed on our website, but for the most part, you want to assume that they're all covered. The reason this option is less commonly used is because sometimes employers can't break down their costs per person or per geographic area. But if the workforce is primarily in San Francisco, or if you have If you have a plan that's only offered to the San Francisco employees, then you may be able to use this one. And then option C, this is when an employer cannot match up hours with enrollment, and also can't isolate the San Francisco claims. So in this situation, the employer can just use 2064 as a stand-in, which means that they're assuming all the employees in the plan were full-time workers. By doing it this way, it makes the number of hours higher and makes it harder for the employer to get to that 247, excuse me, to get to the 351 that's required. There's usually a much larger shortfall. We do see some employers that just find it easier to do it this way, and maybe they've got only a handful of people in San Francisco, and so making a top off for those people is not a big deal. So they can do it this way if they choose to, or if they have no other option. So once you've assessed the value of each of your self-funded health plans or medical or dental or vision plans, you want to account for everything. So in that previous example, they calculated Acme Company's medical plan at $313 an hour that fell short of the requirements for 2024. But now they're going to want to look at each San Francisco employee and figure out if they had other expenditures for those people. So their employee, Anna, here is only enrolled in the medical plan, so they're going to owe her a larger top off. But then they have a second employee named Beth, and she's enrolled in the medical plan and the dental plan, which means that they made an additional expenditure for her, and she's got a smaller shortfall because they spent on her dental. Then they've got a third employee named Carlos who's enrolled in the medical and the dental and the vision plan. And for him, they've exceeded the spending requirement because he's enrolled in all three plans. So they don't need to pay Carlos any sort of top off because they've already spent more than they're required. And now I'm going to pause. I think we do have time for some questions. So Gabrielle, if you have any questions that would make sense for me to address in the group, they might have been thrown into the chat.
Yes, there are some questions in the chat, and there's been some questions asking about, what do they do with these calculations? Do they need to send them to somewhere? What do they need to do with them?
Well, they first, if they run the calculations and they found out that they fell short of the HCSO rate for last year, then they're going to need to make top-off payments to those employees. And Gabrielle's going to get into that in the next session. If you have run the calculations and determined that all of your self-funded plans met or exceeded that 351 per hour, then there's no top-offs required. You do want to keep records so there's a record keeping requirement. You're going to want to keep copies of your calculations and the underlying uh, data that you use. So cost of the claims, employee hours. You want to keep records of that for a 4-year period, but you don't need to turn it into OLSE. What you will do, you're just kind of like hanging on to that in the event that there's an audit or that our office has questions or your employees have questions. But you do want to put the hourly amount that you calculated in the annual reporting form. That is something that the HCSO requires every April. So in that form, there's a section where you can indicate that you had self-funded plans and that the dollar amount was X, but you don't need to actually send in the calculations to us.
Thank you, Mara. I think that's what they wanted to know. Um, when they're looking at calculations, are they only looking at medical, or can you look at medical and prescription? It's a question someone asks.
Yeah, if there's like a pharmacy plan attached to the medical plan, then any amounts the employer's spending do count.
Okay, and I know we have to get on to the second part, but I do want to ask this. It was asked as well. I know we've talked about the HCL's maximum spend of 2,064 hours. Someone asked, if a full-time employee is hired mid-year, do I still need to use the 2,064 hours for that employee?
No, you can use their actual hours. So if they were hired 6 months into the year, you can cut that in half.
Okay, do we have time for more questions or?
I think we can probably take one more and then save others for the end.
Okay, all right. And if I have a plan with no San Francisco employees, do I still need to calculate the costs?
No, if you don't have any employees in San Francisco, or if none of your San Francisco employees are enrolled in that plan, then it doesn't matter. Our office does not have jurisdiction outside of the San Francisco workforce. So I think, yeah, we'll take some more questions at the end of the second session, but I'm going to pass it off to Gabrielle for discussion about top offs.
Okay, thank you, Mara. Okay, great. So now we are going to talk a little bit more, of course, about self-funded, and this discussion will um, talk about top offs. So if after you've made your calculations, if you've determined that the average expenditure fell short of the required amount, which we've talked about in 2024, it's $3.51. So if your expenditure fell short of that, then you are to make a top-off payment by February 28th, 2025. And this, you can see that HCSO Rule 5.10. Um, it explains here that employers with self-funded or self-insured plans that fail to make the required health care expenditure during the calendar year, that employer shall have until the last day of February of the following calendar year to top off the expenditure and find another way to spend the required amount on behalf of the covered employer. So I think we've talked about it a few times, but it is a spending requirement. So if you did not spend enough in that calendar year, then the top off payment is necessary. So who is entitled to these top off payments? Um, we've been talking about making you using, maybe national wide averages, but only those employees that are covered under the ordinance are eligible for top off payments. So as you know, this is a San Francisco ordinance. So only the employees working 8 hours, an average of 8 hours a week, are covered under HCSO. So even though you're using these national wide averages to determine what your cost is, if you do fall short, the top off payment is only owed to your employees in San Francisco. So the payment shall be made on a pro rata basis, meaning that, it's only what the employee worked during that calendar year. So if you had a full-time employee, you would calculate that at 2,064 hours. But for your part-time employees, it would only be, half of those hours. Also, the payments are for former as well as current employees. So if you had employees that left that are no longer there in 2025 and you have to make a top off payment, those employees are also entitled to these top off payments as well. So here's an example. Let me share with you an example of actually calculating top off payments. And we're going to use the Acme company that we've been using on previous slides. Let's just say that the total global workforce of this company is 250 employees. 200 of those employees are full-time workers and 50 are part-time employees. And the part-time employees work an average of 20 hours per week. And again, for this example, just to keep it simple, is that these employees work the full calendar year of 2024, and they're all enrolled in the same self-funded medical plan. So out of the 250 employees that you have worldwide, 15 of those work in San Francisco. 10 of them are full-time and 5 are part-time. So if you, after you complete the uniform coverage calculation, you determine that in 2024, you spent $3.24 per hour on the fully funded medical plan for all of your employees. And so $3.24 is less than the $3.51 expenditure requirement. So there is a shortfall of 27 cents per hour. So this shortfall amount is only for the San Francisco workers. So out of the 250 employees, only those 15 would be entitled to that shortfall amount. So the next step would actually be to calculate the value of the plan that these employees are owed, the actual amounts. So this slide drills down a little bit more as to what that may look like. So out of your 15 employees, 5 of those are part-time, and 10 of those are full-time. So for the full time, you're using the 2,064 hours multiplied by the 27-cent shortfall amount. And the same is true for the part time. You're using the 1,032 hours multiplied by the 27-cent shortfall amount. So for those 5 part-time employees, the top-off amount that's due to each of those employees would be $278.64. And for each of your 10 full-time employees, the amount owed for top-off would be $557.28. So for your 15 employees working in San Francisco, the total top off amount would be $6,966. That is what would need to be paid as a top off amount for those workers. So how do you actually make the top off payment? Now that you know the calculations and you know who it's for, most commonly, employers make deposits or contributions to the employee's health savings account. Often, employers make contributions to San Francisco City Option for employees, or they use another irrevocable health savings account or health care expenditure account to make contributions for employees. One thing that is not allowed under HCSO is that you cannot make direct cash payments to employees as a way to top off. That is not a valid way to comply with HCSO spending. Um, when you do make top-off payments, you do want to ensure that they can be distinguished from your quarterly payments. Let's say, for instance, you're using San Francisco City Option to make quarterly payments. When you make this top-off payment in February, you want to, maybe make a notation that this is a top-off payment, or communicate with City Option. You can give them a call or email them, or just consult with them to find out the best way to make sure that you identify this as a top-off payment so that it can be captured, correctly. And if you're using another irrevocable healthcare way to do this with a different company, you also, need to make sure it's also very distinguishable that this is a top-off payment. Sometimes, with self-funded plans, employers receive refunds. So I want to talk a little bit about that and share with you an example of what that may look like if you have a plan and you receive a refund after you've made a top-off payment. So, in our prior example, at the end of 2024, Acme Company calculated that it had a shortfall of 27 cents, and it made that top-off payment by February 28th of 2025. Well, let's just say in May, because of their good claims history, the carrier they give the Acme a refund, and so Acme has to recalculate the value of the self-funded plan. And when they do, it determines that the true shortfall is 59 cents an hour. So it's necessary to make an additional top-off payment. A second top-off payment would be necessary. Um, We know that Acme paid already has paid the 27 cents. So at this point, now there's a remaining 32 cents an hour shortfall that would be due those San Francisco workers. And this payment should be made within 30 days after it receives notice of um, of the credit. And what you would want to do is go through the same steps that you did with the initial top off. You'll take your part-time workers. This time you'll use the difference of what you've already paid and what you found out was the true shortfall. So in this case, it's 32 cents. So you'll calculate 32 cents by the part-time hours of 1,032 hours, and what is owed to the employee is an additional $330.34. That's what's owed to each of the part-time employees in San Francisco. And you'll use the same formula to calculate those full-time employees using that 32 cents rate times the full-time hours, and you will which is 2,064. And so those full-time employees are owed an additional $660.42. So in 30 days, as an employer, you would make that additional top-off payment for all of those employees in the amount of $8,256. And again, you will want to, ensure that you are able to distinguish that this is a top off payment, so that if there are any questions about how the calculations was done and when the funds were deposited, that you have that information to show that the second round of top off was also made within 30 days of getting your refund from the carrier. Okay, so even though you calculated what the top off payment is, the top off payments are not part of the value of the plan. So when Acme, in the example, when it calculated the value of their plan being at $3.24, that is still what the value of the plan was. In order to comply with HCSO spending requirement, the employer made additional top-offs, but the value of the plans remained the same. So it's only the combination of the plan plus the top off that got the employer at the 351 to make them compliant. But the value of the plan, it's still $3.24. Okay, so covered employees and specifically those remote workers. So by definition, the employees that are covered under HCSO are it comes from where the employees perform the work. So, as I stated, this is a San Francisco ordinance, so it only applies to where work is performed and if the work is performed in San Francisco. So, if an employee works remotely from their home, and they live in San Francisco, then they are covered under HCSO because they are working from their residence, which is located in San Francisco. However, if the employee works remotely and they live outside of San Francisco, then that person is not covered under the healthcare security ordinance. So if you have to make a top off, this top off is only the employees that work in San Francisco would be entitled to the top off. So if you have an employee that works, in 2024, maybe they work part of the time in San Francisco and part of the time in a different city, then only the hours that they worked within the geographical boundaries of San Francisco would be entitled to the top off payment. Okay, so we've talked about the spending requirements, but let's talk about some other requirements. One here is record keeping. Mara did mention this earlier, but every April of each year, an annual reporting form is required for employers to complete. Then on the form, you detail how much you're spending on your covered employees during each quarter. And so the link for the annual reporting form goes live in April, and you will be able to find it on the SFGov HCSO webpage. Another record keeping requirement, and I think we talked about this too, but we're going to mention it here too, is that for employers to keep records for 4 years. And so you'll want to make sure you keep records of, payroll hours, your healthcare expenditures, any kind of payments that you're making for healthcare expenditures, all of your calculations that you're doing. Um, any kind of compliance to HCSO, you'll want to make sure that you have those records available. Also, if you're, having a self-funded plan, you know, really want to make sure that you have the calculations of your expenditures of these self-funded plans, your underlying data, like the claims that you paid, the number of people that are enrolled. Um, You'll need to make sure that you have your calculations that determine what your top off payments were, and the records that show where you made the top off payments. And also very important to keep copies of communication to employees regarding top off payments. Um, we have had self-funded, we have had, you know, employers that have self-funded plans and did and maintain records, but did not, have good communication with their employees. And so this can cause your employees to think that you're not being in compliant with the plan. So it's very important to, make sure you have that communication um, for each calendar year. Okay, along with communication, that happens to be the first best practice here. Let's talk about some of the best practices for self-funded plans. Like I mentioned, communication, I can't say that enough, that employers, if you don't communicate with your employees, they're going to think that you're not complying with HCSO. So inform your employees that that they are enrolled in a self-funded plan. You start this communication during open enrollment in advance of any significant changes to your benefits. Um, During open enrollment, just let them know that this is how that you're complying with HCSO, that what the average amount is that you're spending on the self-funded plan, and if those averages don't comply, that you make a top-off payment in February of the following year. We telling your employees, both the current and former, is it can save a lot of headache, because like I said, if you don't communicate effectively, they will think that you're not complying. We have also sample letters on our website that you can use to help, facilitate that communication. I will say though, we often get calls from employees on our HCSO hotline who maybe don't understand why their benefits differ from their peers. And most employees really don't have any idea about how much their employer is spending on their health care. So, and this is whether they have a self-funded plan or not. So just sharing that information with them can, really go a long way. And continuing with these best practices, if payment is being made to City Option, employers, you have to inform your employees that a contribution has been made. Um, this is necessary so that the employee can go in and set up their accounts, and they can, claim reimbursement for their out-of-pocket expenses. San Francisco City Option is a program that is administered by the Department of Public Health. It's not administered by OLSE. So if you have questions about that program, you certainly can reach out to them. Employers have a specific number that they can call in on, which is 415-615-4492. And employers can also reach them by emailing the employer services at cityoptions.org. And they will respond to any questions that you have about the MRA program that they administer. Another best practice for self-funded employers I want to highlight is to have a knowledgeable point person. With communication, you know, if that person is not knowledgeable or they don't understand um, or not able to answer employees' questions, here again, employees may think that you're not complying with HCSO. So having a knowledgeable person who can answer questions about when they're getting top off payments or why they're not getting top off payments um, is very important. Also, it's also important for if our office calls and asks questions, if you have a benefits administrator uh, that does not know how to answer, our questions, then we also are going to think that the company is out of compliance. So it's just better to ensure that you have someone that can answer those questions, I know we have had employers, particularly nationwide employers, that may have outsourced their HR hotline and it's routed to someone at an 800 number who doesn't know anything about San Francisco laws. So that is oftentimes very disastrous because ultimately the employee is not getting their compliance questions answered, and if we reach out to them, OLSC is not getting the compliance questions answered. So that may initiate for our office to conduct an audit simply by not having a knowledgeable point person available. Another best practice is to be proactive. If you expect to have a large shortfall in February, I mean, a large shortfall at the end of the year and going to make a top off payment in February, um, you can instead of just making one larger payment, I mean, this is not required, but we have seen where brokers and other employers find this very useful, is to spread that payment out over time rather than, being surprised at the end of the year and having one lump sum payment in February. That is something that a lot of employers we've gotten feedback from that help them manage meeting these healthcare expenditures on a timely basis. And then also too, if you did have a large shortfall when you do your calculations in 2024, you may want to examine the employee shared costs, because if that changes or if that decreases or if more people enroll in the coverage or if the employer's spending increases, your shortfall may be smaller the next time. If you want to see some examples of this, we have some on our instruction form, which is also available on our website. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to some additional question and answers, some additional questions and get some answers for us. Okay, let me look at some questions here, Mara. I have a questions here. It says, it does not include temps or temp agencies. Where does the health benefits from temp agencies? Okay, I'm not really sure if I understand that question as far as self-funded.
Yeah, it sounds like uh, if the person wants to clarify more, I think they're saying that the other employer pays for the health benefits for those people, so there there wouldn't be any ability
Okay.
for you to calculate the value of it.
Maybe they can call us in
Yeah.
as well, the hotline. Okay, let's try this question here. Is the top off payment paid only for those enrolled in the plan?
Yes, exactly. So, and only if the plan falls short of the spending requirement. So, for the folks that are enrolled in a different plan or no plan at all, you would have been doing the quarterly expenditures for them. But if you have a self-funded plan that falls short of the requirements, then the top-off payment is owed to the employees enrolled in that plan.
Okay.
And Gabrielle, I saw a couple other questions that I think I want to answer. Well, there's been a number of questions about people living in San Francisco, and I just want to clarify, and you discussed this, Gabrielle, when you're talking about remote work, but what matters is where the person works, not where they live. So if they are working in San Francisco, they're covered by the HCSO. If they're living in San Francisco but working elsewhere, then they are not. Um, if they are remote employees that work out of their homes, then yes, if they live in San Francisco, they're covered. But there were a number of questions about people that live versus work here. And another one, Lily said we have about 3,000 US employees, but only 7 that work in San Francisco. Can I use option B to calculate? And the answer is yes. If you are able to isolate the claims for those 7 people, then yes, you can certainly do it that way. Sometimes employers are not able to do that, but if you are able to do that, you can certainly make it easier by looking just at those 7 people and how much was spent on them. And there was a good question from Jackie. How do you account for employees who were enrolled in a fully insured plan, but then moved to a self-insured plan in the middle of the year? So for that person, you would, I think in this example, the person didn't enroll in the self-funded plan until mid-November. So they are going to be, if there's any claims that they incurred between November and the end of the year that were paid out, those costs are accounted for. But when you do, say the overall average spending on the plan was 340 per hour instead of 351, and there's a shortfall of 11 cents, you're going to account for that person in the top offs but they're going to get a much smaller amount because you're only including the hours that they worked when they were enrolled in the self-funded plan. So that person's probably going to get a very, very small top off because you're only looking at 6 weeks worth of hours. So if they need 11 cents per hour, but they've got very few hours, it's going to be a very minimal top off. And the employer is allowed to look at any other expenditures made. So the fully funded insurance premiums from prior to that would also count. So somebody like that is probably not going to end up getting a top off.
Thank you, Mara. I know there's some other questions we couldn't answer live, but we are going to answer them by responding to your emails within the next 48 hours. I do, before we leave, want to just share some additional resources with you. Please visit our website. You'll find lots of information regarding all of our laws that we enforce on the OLSC website. You'll find the self-funded instructions there as well with examples, the administrative rules, and as I mentioned, some sample letters to employees. You can also sign up for our uh, website to receive updates on the new laws that passed, as well as information regarding the annual reporting form. If you have any questions today, or you think you may have any compliance issues with HCSO or need more information about self-funded, give us a call at 415-554-7892 or reach out to us via email at hcso@sfgov.org.
Thank you,
Thank you
Gabrielle.
all. That will conclude this webinar.
And if you had questions that were not answered, we will be sending you a response shortly. Thank you.